In one of our previous examples, we built a couple of pages. The first page gave us the ability to let the user click on a number of days, and when the user actually did click on a number of days, that data was submitted to a Lightspeed script, which then calculated how far light would travel in that number of days. The way we actually submitted the data from the page with the links to the page that did the calculation was as a GET request. So essentially, at that point, we had put together these days links for the users out of necessity, because it was the only way we knew at the time how to get data from one page to another. Now, however, since we've talked about post-HTTP requests, we know that we also have some other options that are available to us. So it's worthwhile to come back and re-examine the decision we made here to use hyperlinks. Using hyperlinks here was fine and it worked. I would say the main disadvantage of it was that we were only able to give the user a limited number of different possibilities to choose from. We let them pick 1 day, 7 days, 30 days, 365 days. We certainly could have made more hyperlinks than that, but obviously we couldn't potentially give the user every number of days that they might want to click on. There would simply be too many links, essentially an infinite number of links. So now that we have the ability to be able to do post requests, is there maybe another option? Why, yes, there certainly is. What if instead of using hyperlinks at all, what if we instead provided the user with a form? The user could then fill in the form, complete the form however they saw fit, and then we could have the data from that form submit to a Lightspeed script so that the user could still see the result of their calculation. Let's take a look at how we might want to do that. Back over in my text editor, I've begun a new file. I've called it days form, and what I want to do here in this particular page is I want to put together a form that the user can complete, which will then submit its data over to the Lightspeed script. The Lightspeed script I have here is essentially the exact same Lightspeed script I had before, right? So it's expecting to receive some data, and it'll then do the calculation and display the output. So back on my Days Forms page, let me go ahead and start by creating a new form. For the action on this form, I'm going to say you're going to submit to a page called lightspeed.php. For the method, I'm going to set it to post. This is one of those situations where I don't really have a particularly good reason for setting it to post, but hey, why not? It's an example. My form here already has a submit button down at the bottom. All I need to do is now figure out a way for the user to supply the number of days that they want the calculation to be based on. So how about I start off maybe with a text field. I'm going to create a text field with a label. I'm going to have it be called days. I've got my label, I've got my text field called days. Let me just clean that up a wee bit. There we go. Take a look at that in my browser, and that's the way it actually looks right now. Let's see if it actually works. If I go over to my days form and I put in a number of days, I'll say 2 days, an option we didn't have in our previous example, and I say continue. It looks like I did go to my Lightspeed page. I can see from the URL up here that I have gone to the Lightspeed page, but I am getting a notice, essentially an error, telling me I have an undefined index days on line 4. Let's go back over and look at our Lightspeed script and see if we can figure out what the problem is. Here in the Lightspeed script, I can see line 4 is right here. When it says undefined index days, it's referring to this $_get days, but it's saying that's undefined. Do you know why? Well, it's because previously when we used this file, we were submitting the data, the days data, as part of a GET request. But now with my form, remember, I made the arbitrary decision to use a POST request this time. So if I want to update my Lightspeed script so that it's able to work with my Lightspeed days forms, instead of doing $_get here, I'm going to change that to post. With that one little change, if I go back to my browser now and hit refresh, resends the data, it looks like it's worked. In 2 days, light will travel this many miles. If I go back and instead of saying 2 days, I say 89 days, seems good. What if I tried a fraction? What if I said in 3.4 days? Looks like that worked okay too. So By getting rid of our hyperlinks and instead providing the user with a form, we've made it much more flexible, made the application much more flexible, where the user now has the ability to put in essentially any number of days that they might particularly want. We have also, however, introduced a potential problem. What if a user should go to my days forms and say calculate based on 9 days, and they actually spell out the word 9, N-I-N-E? Well, when they submit that, my Lightspeed script doesn't know how to handle it. It says in 9, N-I-N-E days, light will travel 0 miles. My script is not set up to recognize number words. So while it did correctly receive the post value, it was not able to then do a proper calculation based on it. This problem that we have here is going to eventually lead us off into a much larger subject, which is form validation. Whenever we provide the user with flexibility in the form of a form, not only does that make it possible for the user to do a greater variety of correct things than they would have been able to do if we'd only given them hyperlinks to click on, but unfortunately it also provides the user with a great number of incorrect things that they can do as well. It then becomes the responsibility of our script to double check and look at the values that the user is actually filling into the forms, look at the values that the user is actually submitting, and try to decide whether those values appear to be valid or not. If they are valid, then the script can go on and do what it's supposed to do, but if they're not valid, then we'll have to come up with some sort of system that allows errors or problems to be shown to the user so that they can then make corrections. Is there anything we could do based on the knowledge that we have at this point that would help eliminate these kinds of problems? Well, yes, there is. What if in our form, instead of providing the user with a text field, what if we instead gave the user a different form control? In a way, you can think of the fact that we used a text field here as being the root of the problem. It's the fact that the user had the ability to type in the word 9, N-I-N-E, that led to this problem. What if we had instead given the user radio buttons or a select component, something that would have more carefully restricted what it was that they were actually allowed to enter? That could have avoided the problem of the user making invalid input in the first place. Those two options, however, radio buttons or a select component, also would have led us right back to our original problem, the same problem we had with the hyperlinks, in that how could we possibly, with radio buttons or select component, show the user every possible number that they might want to feed into the calculation? The answer is really that we can't. But the reason I bring this up is I want to point out the fact that form design, the actual selection of the different input components that you use in a form, is important and can potentially, in certain situations, end up saving you a whole lot of work. If we give the user a text field for every piece of input, then that just means that further down the line we're going to have a lot more validation work we're going to have to perform. Whereas if in certain cases we can more carefully restrict what the user is allowed to enter through the use of different form components, select components, checkboxes, radio buttons, things like that, then that makes it much more difficult for the user to do the wrong thing. It doesn't necessarily completely relieve us of the responsibility for performing form validation later, but it does at least help reduce the amount of frustration that a user might feel because they don't understand what it is that they're supposed to be entering or how.